to first of all start out by talking about your career. You've worked with a veritable who's who of 20th century musicians. You were educated under Karl-Heinz Stockhausen and Pierre Boulez. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like working with them? What were they like, I guess?
Well, we know Boulez as conductor, and very smooth, very gentle. When I studied with him, he was the opposite. He was the young intellectual, and he would teach classes, and everybody was scared of his sharp intellect. He would explain a problem to us over 10 minutes, and then he says, "Did you understand?" And we said, "No." Then he laughed, and he explained it in 30 seconds, and we all understood. The intellect was, sharper than anybody else, was intimidating to most people, and we were afraid of him.
So what kinds of things would he get on you about
Analysis.
Really?
Yeah. Of course, for him at that time, music stopped with Debussy and Schoenberg. Everything before was rubbish.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Or, no, he didn't say rubbish, of no interest whatsoever.
So he was more interested in basically post-Debussy Afternoon of a Faun.
Well, post-Webern, even.
Yeah. That second Viennese school.
Yeah.
And what about Stockhausen? What was it like working with him?
Stockhausen was more in the clouds, He was more he played much more the genius,
okay,
while Boulez played the intellectual.
Huh. And were their teaching styles the same?
No, different.
So what was Stockhausen like as a teacher? I mean, other than being in the clouds, what
he would much more talk about visions. Visions in sound visions and music. Boulez that shows you how extreme he was. He said, in a few years, you're not going to listen to music anymore. We just read the scores.
Huh.
He said many things that, in later years he would be embarrassed to.
Right.
To be reminded of things like that.
Yeah. I was doing some reading about your own compositions. At one time you were a composer.
That's a long time ago.
Were a composer, but sometimes what sometimes comes up is the influence of Stockhausen and Pierre Boulez on your own compositions. Do you feel that their music influenced your own compositions when you were composing?
But, I composed as a young man, and as a young man, of course, you're incredibly influenced. By your teachers, to the point too much. It's more important to find your own voice, and this is, if you have very strong teachers, it's more difficult.
Right. So why? I guess it begs the question: why did you stop composing?
Oh, I have two explanations. One is, when I was composing and a work, a symphonic work of mine was performed, and I was sitting in the audience. I looked around, and everybody hated it. Now, that's the life of the composer.
Right.
The life of a conductor. I walk on stage, and audience already applauds before I have done anything. That's the life of a conductor.
Right.
Slightly different.
Mm-hmm.
No. That's a joke.
Right.
The more serious thing is that when you are a composer, obviously your head is full of your music.
Yeah.
When you're a conductor and you're a good conductor and you associate with the music that you're conducting, then I wake up in the morning with somebody else's music in my head.
Right.
And you can see that most conductors composed once.
Right.
And then stopped as they got more into conducting. They dried up. You go with Furtwängler, Klemperer, George Sell, they all composed. And with Boulez too. I mean, once he got really into conducting, then he reworked old works.
Right.
But he actually, his musical expression became conducting.
Huh.
It is a fact. There, however, I have to say two exceptions. There are two composers, conductors, where it worked. One was Richard Strauss, and the other one was Mahler. Also, Mahler composed only on vacation.
Yes, yeah.
But still.
I don't know. I think of the other composer that used to compose a lot during summer vacations is Brahms, but I'm not sure how much conducting he did, if any.
He didn't see himself as a conductor.
Yeah. So I have to ask a question. Because you were at one time a composer, does it help you learn new scores faster because you have this background?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I did so much contemporary music in my life. That you just see it. You know the tricks. That's not the right word, but you know the techniques, and it's also, the learning. The more you learn, the easier it gets.
Right.
So when I go on vacation, I come back, then learning is more difficult.
Huh. Wow. And I guess it must help when it comes to large-scale forms as well. You can visualize the score better with the larger, internal structures. Yeah. You also studied with or worked with George Szell and Leopold Stokowski. How did they run rehearsals, and how were the rehearsals different? Oh,
well, they were totally different. I experienced George Szell only in his last year, where I've been told that he mellowed, but still everybody was afraid of him. And when he came into Severance Hall, everybody was sitting up.
Right.
And he was an incredibly powerful personality with eyes that kind of looked through you. And he was in total control of everything that happened at Severance Hall in the concert hall, from the box office to the cleaning stuff. He was the one who had the complete control. And of course, he had the complete control over the orchestra, and that's also why that orchestra became so fantastic.
Right, it became such a machine, a well-oiled machine.
Yeah, but you see, what is so different with today, those conductors who built the big American orchestras, they all had hiring and firing power.
Right.
So the musicians were afraid. And I have seen with Stokowski that he fired people right in a rehearsal, out.
Yeah.
And that is today totally different. You can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
Furthermore, with the unions, it's very hard to get rid of a musician. In an orchestra, everybody in the orchestra has to be convinced that this doesn't work anymore. However, today it's very easy to get rid of a conductor because the musicians take a vote and give it to the press, and then you're gone. So the work a conductor does today is totally different from what Stokowski and George Szell and Fritz Reiner and all those.
It's funny you mention Fritz Reiner. I mean, because when I think of what's the word, tyrannical conductors, Reiner is the one that really pops to my mind. I mean, I've heard just horror stories about immediate. That's it. You're done. So, what do you think? I don't know how to phrase this. Are you for unions or are you against? Like, which situation do you think is best?
No, fortunately there have been unions. Otherwise, we still have, all those orchestras being being afraid of a tyrant.
Right.
No, they have done a great thing. It's just once the union has achieved that, it's then one has to be careful not to go even further.
Right. It's about finding the balance, I guess.
I'll give you an example. It used to that most American orchestras would record. Today they don't. Because the union put on the tariff so high that the recording companies record in London or in Vienna or in Berlin.
Right.
I think there the union has gone too far. But the union has done great things, has established a certain justice and in the orchestra world.
Right. Huh. One of the other things that I find so fascinating about you as a conductor is your tendency to record composers that are a little bit more off the beaten path. I know you've recorded the symphonies of Johannes Verhulst, Myslivicek, Kromer, Hubert Perry, etc. What draws you to these composers that are sort of, I guess, off the beaten path? What's the attraction?
Well, it all started actually when I became music director of the London Mozart Players, and we had a contract with the record company Chandos. And Chandos asked me, what Mozart do you want to record? And I thought for a very long time, and then realized that Mozart is completely over-recorded.
Right.
You know, at that time, in the 90s, there were still record stores. And if you take a piece like the Jupiter Symphony, and you look in the catalog, there were between 50 and 60 recordings. If you go to your record store, maybe 5 would be in the record store. And 50 didn't even make it to the record store. So I thought recording Mozart is not what I want to do. That isn't. And then I had the idea that, you know, talking of the 90s, in the classical period, we actually know only 3 composers. This Mozart, Haydn, and Beethoven, and they all lived close to each other. There must have been music all over Europe.
Right.
And I had the idea, we want to record the contemporaries of Mozart. First, to know what was around him, what kind of music Mozart heard when he was to a concert on one side. On the other side, also to understand Mozart better.
Right. Yeah, there's that whole series of CDs that Chandos has put out, literally called Contemporaries of Mozart, and you are a featured conductor on many of those recordings.
In all of them.
All of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
23. Which that was the idea of not doing the music that is 50 times recorded, but something that is new. And this is also very, very much in the interest of the record company, because if you can write on your CD that is a first recording, then there's so many libraries around the world, so many universities who buy it because they have everything that is recorded. So then, you know, maybe 500 copies are already sold when it says first recording. So
right. So from a business standpoint,
they like that.
It's good as well.
And then it went on then to, you know, you mentioned the Dutch ones, but also the Korngold, the Dochnanis, and the Perry. Frank Martin, and then more obscure, the Roberto Gerard.
So was this, like, I'm just thinking of the recordings that you made of the Johannes Verhulst symphonies. Was that an arrangement that was done with Chandos Records, or did you pick those symphonies? How did that work?
I was then asked to go to The Hague, to the Residencia Orchestra, because they wanted to have a series of recordings of Dutch music, of which there is not that much. And so the recording company and that orchestra, which I've conducted before, decided that I should be the one who does that series. That's the way it came.
Okay.
But so I did not choose that repertoire.
Huh. And so what was it like getting these scores in your hand? Like, I mean, I'm just thinking about those symphonies of Verhulst. They're not recorded. I think the recording you made might have very well have been one of the first.
The first.
First. Like, how did it feel to get those scores in your hand and then, like, sort of figure out what exactly he was doing? I mean, he's such a fabulous composer, student of Mendelssohn.
But, you know, it's exactly the same with a Perry. The 5 Perry symphonies that also were absolutely... Well, the 5th was recorded, but the others were not recorded. And the contemporaries of Mozart, they're all... were not recorded, you know. This is all just looking at the score and trying to figure out what's in it.
So, I mean, like, I'm just trying to sort this out in my head. Would you get copies of the autograph manuscript, or are there actual? I mean,
some I did more with the contemporaries of Mozart, but the whole and the Verhulst and those Dutch they were published in their time. So there was a decent material.
Right.
But one thing, coming back to the London Mozart players and to the recording in England, and you're not allowed to rehearse for a recording. That had to be paid like a recording. With other words, all the recordings I did in England was sight reading.
That's crazy.
It is crazy.
And then, because of course recording studio is expensive to rent, it needs to be done first, second take, right? Very often, like there's not a lot of there wouldn't be a lot of rehearsal time in that.
There's no rehearsal time.
Yeah.
You know that we recorded the first movement, and they didn't know how the second and the third and the fourth sounded.
Wow.
It's a big pressure, and it's a technique you have to learn as a conductor. You know,
right?
Super efficient.
Yeah. Okay, so you're here in Winnipeg conducting this Friday and Saturday night with the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra. How many times have you conducted the WSO?
About 3 times.
Yeah, because they refer to you as an old friend, and as you were saying earlier, it's an orchestra that you have conducted before.
Yeah, we had a lovely relationship, and then you know how it is with orchestras. Then a new management comes or a new music director comes, and he wants something new,
right?
And then you're out. But then usually you're in somewhere else because exactly the same thing happens somewhere else, and then you're in. Right. So one moves, you know. Then I have had, you know, work in various places where it's like clusters. Then everybody, like right now it's Japan and Asia for me,
right?
And it's also repertoire, you know. For of course, we mentioned before, I was considered a specialist for contemporary music, and then in England I was a specialist for Bruckner, and then a specialist, of course, for Mozart with the London Mozart plays. Mm. They always, you know, pigeonhole you, which is usually not what I want. I used to say, I'm not a specialist. No music is safe from me.
Right. So you're talking about sort of being the specialist in new music. It sort of brings me to my next question. There's a piece on the program by the Canadian composer Jacques Etu. Did you know about Etu's music before this concert, or have you come across it? And what can you tell us about the piece that's going to be performed on Friday and Saturday night?
Of course, I knew the name. I cannot say whether I have heard his music, but it meant something to me. What should I say? I was asked a few days ago what I think of this piece, and I said, it's not boring, because a lot of contemporary music is boring.
Right.
This isn't boring.
Yeah.
It is. It has 3 movements, and it describes legends, Canadian legends.
Okay.
And they are strange legends to me. I think it must say something about the Canadian soul.
Right. Are there titles at the beginnings of the pieces?
Yes.
Or?
Yes, and it also gets the first one is Alexis Trotting Horse. So Alexis, centuries ago, like it is with legends, apparently thought he was a horse. And because he was convinced he could run as fast as a horse, as fast as a bicycle, as fast as a car, as fast as a train. So he did this all day long, and apparently at night he danced and he never got tired.
Okay.
The second one is The Devil at the Ball. So there is a girl who is invited to a fancy ball where she dances, and she dances a dance that, and this is true, that in the past to dance the waltz was not considered good. But she danced its waltz, and as she was dancing this waltz, a beautiful young man comes to her and puts a gold necklace around her neck. As soon as that necklace is around her neck, this necklace turns into a hot, burning iron and burns her, and she falls down. The young man, turns out, is the devil, and he takes her soul.
Oh.
Not very cheerful. Huh?
Yeah. Reminds me a bit of a Dvorak tone poem or something. I know Jacques Etude actually through his concertos, and his music, for me, there are moments I find in his music that are almost impressionistic. And I'm speaking here mostly of the concertos. Is it sort of the same with these legends, or no?
No, not at all. Because they're quite weird stories,
Right.
And there are tremendous amounts of notes. That orchestra, I said to the orchestra, I hope you get paid by the notes you play, which they don't, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But they play a lot of notes.
Okay, so I want to turn to the next two big pieces on the program. I want to start with the Franck D minor symphony. It's such a fantastic symphony. Like, it really is a marvelous, marvelous symphony. It's strange that when it was first performed, it really wasn't that well received. Do you want to talk about that? Like, I find it strange that 1888, I think, is when it was written. He died in 1890, and it didn't become well known until after that. It was a bit of a what's the word? Not conspiracy, but it was a bit of a fight to get this thing performed, right?
Well, you have to realize that at that time there were two fractions of in French music. There was the ones around Saint-Saëns,
right,
the real French,
mm-hmm,
and the ones around Franck and Vincent d'Indy,
mm-hmm,
that were influenced by Wagner and by the Germans.
right.
And so the French, they didn't want any German influence, and so it was a political thing. It was unfortunate that this piece was not understood, and also, of course, it was a symphony. The French didn't really do symphonies much, and then it's a symphony that is actually cyclical.
Right. Cyclical, this idea that the theme reoccurs
Right.
in multiple movements, right?
And then it has only 3 movements.
Right.
Symphony is supposed to have 4 movements. So I have the impression that there's some people that they just didn't want to listen to it. As you said, it's a fantastic piece. It's harmonically incredibly complicated.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting is also with César Franck is not like most composers who started writing big masterpieces when they were young. He only did it when he was very old.
Right.
Maybe the music that is performed today was composed in his last 5 years.
Yeah. And it is strange, again, that it's written in 3 movements. And, I've heard arguments that there is sort of a trio thing in the middle of the second movement, I guess, where the strings become a little bit more agitated, and that's how he gets around the idea of a third movement scherzo. But, I mean...
I think that is a word. It's the slow movement mixed in a scherzo.
Yeah. Because it starts out with that beautiful English horn, right? And then about maybe 2/3 of the way through, the strings become a little bit more agitated. But even with those agitated strings, there's that beautiful melodic line that's happening.
But that agitated thing is the idea, for me, of a scherzo.
Right.
That never developed, but
so
it's there.
There is sort of a third movement there. Yeah. Maybe that's one of the ways he can get around
it's
writing.
All in one.
All in one, yeah. Okay, so in the last piece on the program on Friday and Saturday night is Bartok's terrific third piano concerto. Zoltan Fejervari is the name of the pianist. Mm-hmm. How has it been? What has it been like rehearsing with him, and how's that process been going?
Good. It's the difficult thing with this piece. I always find it difficult. Is that Bartok almost finished it.
Right.
It's practically just the last few bars he didn't. But what he doesn't, what is not Bartok, are the tempis and the dynamics. And so his student, Tibor Surly, finished it. Of course, there was much more than in the viola concerto, where there is practically a movement missing. Mm-hmm. So we don't really exactly know what he wanted. There is, he also died before it was performed, so we don't know. And there are things that are in the score that I find very, mainly dynamics, very questionable, and also some of the tempos. Yeah. But when you accompany a soloist, I never insist on my vision, because the most important thing is that he gets a good performance. And in order to get a good performance, the soloist has to feel comfortable.
Right. It's funny you mentioned the dynamics, because this morning, actually, I listened to 2 performances of the third piano concerto, one with Marta Argerich and one with Zoltan Fejervari. There's a recording of him on YouTube doing it. Mm-hmm. And Marta Argerich, as you might expect, is big, and it's very percussive, and it's mesmerizing. And then Zoltan's performance is, I don't want to say subdued, but the dynamics are much less than the Argerich recording. It's fascinating. One of the other things that I found interesting about it is Bartok wrote it as a birthday present to his wife, Dida, right?
Yes.
And I'm thinking of the time, he would have just come off the success of the Concerto for Orchestra, right? It's a bit of a head scratcher, because before the Concerto for Orchestra, he didn't have a lot of success in the United States. And between that and his health. So did he write this third piano concerto in, I guess, sort of a better mood? I know his health was failing, but one, he wasn't writing it on a commission like he was with the Concerto for Orchestra, and one, he was writing it as a birthday present for his wife. I mean, this concerto for me is more optimistic, I guess. Maybe it's a little. It's surprising. What do you think?
Well, certainly the slow movement is incredibly optimistic, if you want the word, beautiful and very singing, very. Yeah, it's certainly nothing depressing or. Yeah. It is still profound, but in a very light.
Right.
I mean, that light as see-through.
Yeah.
Score.
Yeah. One of the other things, whenever I think of Bartok, one of the other things I always think about is rhythm. He's at times could write some terribly, terribly difficult rhythms. Does it create problems between pianist and orchestra and conductor, putting those three elements together, do you find, or how is that working?
I would think the first time the concerto was performed, there were problems in the last movement. But today, I mean, practically every orchestra has played this piece.
Right.
It's like the Rite of Spring, they couldn't play it at the beginning, and now today orchestras play it in their sleep.
Yeah, and just because it's become literature.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
when it comes up to be performed,
Yeah.
they're just sort of on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just such a great concerto. So I have to ask, I'll sort of wrap the interview up this way. What's next after you are out of the cold of Winnipeg? Where are you off to after this?
Well, bad news. I have an orchestra in Japan where I'm music director, and I have a principal guest conductorship in South Korea. So I'm supposed to go to South Korea, and yesterday I found out that all the concerts in South Korea are cancelled.
Why?
Because of the virus.
Because of the coronavirus.
They already did the February. I knew the February was cancelled, but I was then shocked when March also got cancelled.
Wow. Oh, man.
So I stay home.
Matthias, it's just been a real pleasure to be with you here and just talking about this wonderful concert that's going to happen on Friday and Saturday night. It sounds just great. I just want to thank you so much for stopping by our Classic 107 studios. It's been a real treat and joy for me.
It's a pleasure for me. Thank you.
Thank you.